Well, a very good morning. It's 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. Welcome to Media Monitor, bringing you in-depth analysis of some of the biggest stories throughout this week. We're live here on the SABC News channel. I am Alisha Ntlantla Jali. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. This is what I have coming up in the next hour. We're going to unpack the midterm budget policy statement, and Finance Minister's speech paints a picture of an economy in crisis. We delve into the horrifying crime stats and we ask, have we become immune to utter lawlessness across the country? And finally wrap up with the latest developments in Kenya as we look at what came out of the country's election rerun. But before we unpack all these stories, it is time to take a look at the news in brief this hour. Presidential hopeful Lindiwe Sisulu says the current challenges faced by the ANC was due to factionalism and corruption being overlooked. Sisulu was addressing the Mzala ANC branch yesterday, which is backing her presidential bid.
With only a month left before the December conference, presidential hopeful Lindiwe Sisulu gunning for the top position.
A kind of woman who will make sure...
Sisulu says the ANC must move from its comfort zone and allow a woman to lead. She accused the party of waiting too long in addressing its internal challenges.
Over a long period of time, we have allowed a situation where factionalism is overlooked. And we know that it is sedimenting. If you overlook something sufficiently, it takes on the shape of acceptability. We've become a very factionalized institution in the ANC. The sad thing about it is that it is whether or not I like you or I don't like you that determines the value that I attach to you.
As the nomination from branches in Gauteng are about to reach its half mark, Sisulu visited Zone 11, made up of 7 ANC branches. Last week, some branches announced her competitor Cyril Ramaphosa as the next president. She shares the same sentiment as former President Thabo Mbeki that the ANC is eating itself. Sisulu says she's also worried about vote purchasing.
An epidemic of people buying votes, people buying branches, and this is the most terrible scourge the ANC could ever encounter. The ANC is a voluntary organization, and everybody in the ANC has a right to express themselves and to choose a leader.
She called on the ANC to respect O.R. Tambo by emulating his values and to remember his sacrifices for a democratic South Africa. Ntlantla Khatlani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
In Somalia, 2 car bombs have killed at least 17 people in the capital, Mogadishu. The latest bomb blasts come 2 weeks after a huge truck bomb killed hundreds of civilians in that city.
Devastation in Mogadishu as the Somalian capital is once again rocked by 2 car bombs. One of the car bombs, detonated by a suicide bomber, exploded after ramming into a hotel located less than a mile away from the presidential palace. A witness saying he heard a loud explosion and saw smoke rising over the scene as ambulances rushed towards it. Armed militants subsequently storming the hotel, resulting in a gun battle. Minutes later, a second bomb exploded near the former Parliament House, the Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab claiming responsibility. It's been responsible for frequent bombings and gun attacks in the Horn of Africa country. Al-Shabaab is fighting to topple Somalia's Western-backed government and to rule according to its strict interpretation of Islamic Sharia law. A series of bomb attacks earlier in October killed at least 358 people. Although many suspect Al-Shabaab, it did not claim responsibility for those attacks.
Let's look at your sporting action now. Kaizer Chiefs thrashed AmaZulu FC 3-0 in a Telkom Knockout Cup last night in the last 16 match at the Moses Mabhida Stadium yesterday. The emphatic victory sees Amakhosi progress into the quarterfinals, while Lesotho buy out of the competition. Meanwhile, 2 goals in extra time saw Bidvest Wits beat Free State Stars 4-2. These are the highlights.
Shabalala. Maluleka gets a deflection and scores. It was a wicked deflection too, but it's a goal for George Maluleka. Sikakane cleared it. Eckstein gets the shot in, but of a deflection and a goal. Shabba might have a chance. He puts it away with the left foot.
Wawanda phakathi kweRagasipana Makhanda Kalakata
Siphelele Nthembu, lovely thick on. Yes, Thabo Mapakisha, beautifully done. 1-1. In the repeat of the 2015-2016 penalty, Daniel Bennett did not hesitate. It's got to be clean. Kamal against Sangare. It is Ahmed Kamal. 2-1 the scoreline. On the turn, Snetemba Chanchi Bandura penalty. Snetemba Chanchi brought down. Spelala Mthembu. 2-2. It's been a difficult season in the PSL for the students, languishing in the bottom half of the ABSA Premiership in 14th position. Yes, Kamal, in with the chance!
All right, I'm pleased with those results. After the break, we take a look at stories that have been trending on social media this past week. Don't go anywhere.
A lot of us rely on tech to survive, and Africa is already a mobile-first continent.
We built mobile technology that connects motorcycle taxis to commuters and businesses in real time.
My phone was the most important thing.
Africans are using technology to innovate. On Network, we have African technology and social media news. Even robots have heard about us.
Hello, watch Network on SABC.
For African technology and social media news, join Ms. Phumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 9 p.m.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Let's welcome our guest on the panel today. We're very pleased to welcome back on the show media analyst Mr. William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa and Mr. Shaun Mokari. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. Such a pleasure. Welcome.
Good morning. Good to be here.
All right, and I do have Mr. Lebo Chankela, SABC digital news producer, joining us to give us all the trending stories this week. A very good morning to you, Lebo.
Good morning, Alicia.
What has been trending on social media this week?
We know the coffin assault.
That sentence, hey?
There's been mixed reactions, however. Some people are saying that that sentence is a bit too harsh. But while some people are saying that, you know what, they deserve to learn their lessons. And you know what, if this kind of sentence is handed out, that people will not repeat it again.
Absolutely.
But basically, there's like a mixed reaction to that sentence.
Let's look at those mixed reactions, Lebo. What are people saying on actual social media? Let's look at the tweets they're in. All right, that's incredible. X says 11 and 14 years imprisonment. Give that judge a bells. Thank you so much for the contribution. What's Africa saying there, Lebo?
And Africa says, big up South Africa's justice system. You gain some trust in
Evro Lily says, hashtag coffin assault justice was served today. To all those committing these kinds of racial crimes, be warned, this will not be tolerated in South Africa. What's Kulani Koma saying there?
We should all applaud the sentencing of the coffin assault criminals. Racism must be removed from our society. They're toxic and divisive.
My goodness. William, what did you make of the social media reactions to this the sentence?
I think very appropriate, actually, given the severity of the crime.
Yeah.
And what I'm pleased about is that the court case was dealt with quite quickly. I mean, as justice processes go, this was dealt with quite quickly, quite smoothly. And I understand that the survivor was also quite happy with the result. So this is I think it's a very important thing. And the fact that there was such an overt racist element to it I'm sure added to the severity of the sentence.
Shani, what did you make of the developments?
Well, I feel the same. I mean, we come from a society where racism was entrenched in society through law and through state action. So I think we need severe action like this to be able to make people realize that actually we need to normalize this society, and racism cannot be tolerated, either committed by black people or by white people.
You know, the judge actually emphatically announcing right there in court during the sentencing procedures that the defendants cannot even appeal their sentence or conviction. Let's look at the next big hashtag there, Lebo. What's happening on social media?
Well, the midterm budget, we asked people, what do you make of the midterm budget 27 delivered by Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba? Well, 30% says good, honest budget. 18% say needed more substance. 21% says SOE problem not addressed, and 48% downgrade inevitable.
My goodness.
And that's basically some of the sentiments that are coming through on social media.
Let's look at the tweets, Lebo. I'm dying to find out what people were saying. Let's look at those tweets. If we can scroll up and actually see, that's Musa Maimane saying, in essence, Gigaba committed to bailouts, nuclear and radical stealing by the president, explains the drop-off in currency, etc.
And as it unlocks, says Gigaba has disposed all the government telecom shares in order to bail out SAA. Reactionary thinking by government is pathetic.
Our HAP News says we further welcome the continued commitment to expanding access to life-saving ARVs with plans to enroll a further 400,000 patients. Hashtag the midterm budget speech. Gentlemen, your quick reviews. Let's start with you, Shani. I mean, mixed reviews. A lot of people are saying, well, he was honest. A lot of people are saying, yeah, well, he didn't mention the important things. We're still going to discuss this a little bit further. What were your reactions to the social media side of the budget speech?
Well, the analysis pretty much reflect my
It sums up everything,
He did a good job in telling us what we already know, which is what the problems are, but very little in what we're going to do about it, or concrete long-term solutions. I mean, selling off good state assets to fund the bad ones is not a good idea.
William?
Yeah, deepening economic crisis. It looks like it's all bad news all the way in from here, which is not very good, and certainly doesn't all go well for December. And I think that's what we'd like to see is some more unpacking of what those things mean. And also who gets and who doesn't, because it's well and fine to say he's telling us what we know, but let's talk about what it means for ordinary people and who actually loses out, and we know who that is actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Lebo, a very big last hashtag. Quickly, what are we looking at?
No, basically, I don't really think we have any...
are we done with our hashtag for this week? Thank you so much. Do give our viewers a URL where they can get all those stories and more. Lebo?
Well, www.sabc.co.za/SABC
News. All right, that's where you're going to get all these stories, developmental news and more. And of course, this show coming on right after 10 o'clock. After the break, is South Africa broke? Find out when we unpack Malusi Gigaba's maiden budget speech. Don't go anywhere. All right, well, it was a much anticipated midterm budget as Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba delivered his inaugural budget policy statement this past week. While frank and honest, it did little to reassure the nervous investors. If anything, the rand tumbled 20 cents while Gigaba was busy delivering his statement. He painted a very bleak picture of SA's economic status and little room to maneuver from low economic growth, so belt tightening and a grim economic future prospect is on the cards for the ordinary South Africans. Well, for this discussion, we're very pleased to be joined by economist Lesiba Motata from Lesiba Investment Solutions. A very good morning to you, Lesiba. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Lesiba, you've heard all the reviews and everything, and everybody having their own say about their reactions to the minister's midterm budget speech. What was your reaction?
Not a good budget.
Why?
While it's clear that the issues, one can separate things that were outside our control, and that determines the severity of what can happen there. But also there are things that are in our control. What makes it unwelcome, so to speak, this budget, is because that which was in our control, okay, that which we could have controlled, was left to change the financial matrix of South Africa profoundly. It was in the hands of the authorities to stop the bailouts. It was in the hands of the authorities to project a debt to GDP ratio that shows consolidation. It was in the hands of the authorities to manage the debt service costs. It was in the hands of the authorities to manage the public sector wage bill. It was in the hands of the authorities to make sure that there's no change in the budgeting process. All that was all within our control and did not arrive.
Listen, a lot of people are saying, but the minister was honest. I mean, should we be looking at new reforms as we go towards the final quarter of this year? Can we expect any change? I mean, they've revised the growth to 0.7%.
Well, the element of honesty is an important one.
Yeah.
And we've seen the authorities in the Treasury work very hard to make sure that the detail, I mean, for example, public sector wage bill has grown faster than the overall budget for the last 8 years. We didn't know that because we don't have the data. It's only the National Treasury that has that. So they put it out, which was very welcome. But the thing about honesty is that for South Africa, we are now being helped by the quality of our institutions. You could see from the budget there are other decisions that are beginning to encroach. There's a change. I looked at the budget and I found a very different South Africa. It's completely different to what we had in February. There are other contributions that are beginning to come in, but the quality of our institutions are now again coming back to protect SA. It was not the case in Brazil. That's why they had the situation they had. They lied on their budget deficits. We looked at one side, it was minus 5% to GDP, the deficit. We opened our eyes, we found it at 10. This was why they got to where they had. So the honesty is an important element in SA, and it shows the quality of analysis. In fact, the quality of the National Treasury and the analytics that came up. But what happened there is all that quality, world class, if you ask me, put out on the table, but nothing happened. It was just diagnosis. So they left it on the table without any form of resolution. Instead, and to my dismay, if you asked me, because it changes the process of budgeting, it's now left to a tangential task team that will be set up to look at the fiscal construct of the country. Has not happened since 1994. And that is problematic because the certainty that was achieved when you have a medium-term budget in October, it makes it clearer for what will happen in February, has now been materially blurred. I have no sight of what will happen in February. But anything can come out.
But then, listen, I mean, we saw the surprise GDP growth that happened in the second quarter recently, and I remember the minister saying that the GDE decline in growth was brought on by the bailout of SOEs. Are we saying that why do we then need to keep investing in these SOEs if they're not performing? They're actually bleeding the state dry.
I know. And then is the clarity of what's going on. And you could see that some of these decisions are taken with other influences that are political in nature. And I think it's going to take politics.
We're just talking now that economics have become, there's such a thin line, it's embroiled in politics.
I can see it in the numbers, you know. It makes sense that there's a developmental state contributions into things.
Yeah.
But to what degree? What will you have as an economy if you continually just throw money at a black hole? There won't be any development to talk about. There won't be any transformation to talk about. You can't lose the levers of fiscal policy, which increasingly I'm beginning to see an erosion of that lever, which is problematic.
Let's talk about investor confidence and, of course, the ratings agencies in particular after that delivery of that speech. What do you think they're actually thinking right now? I mean, we've revised that growth right down to 0.7%.
Right. So it's clear, man, this without a doubt.
Are we facing a possible downgrade?
Well, it's a certainty. Because what has come out does not reflect consolidation.
Absolutely
it does not.
Yeah.
You only need to look at one graph, which is debt to GDP ratio. If there was any element to try to curtail the growth of that, you'll see it taper off. Now, just look at the graph, it goes just continually up. Now, so it's a certainty. There's no consolidation. There is a change in how things are put together, and this is not a behavior of an investment-grade country.
Let's talk about some of the most important aspects that I'm sure a lot of people were waiting to listen intently to. The issue of the higher education fees. I do understand that the minister was saying that, of course, they will be announcing the proper budget to be allocated to higher education later on. And, of course, we know the whole controversy around the fees commission. Let's talk about that. Do you think it was properly addressed as to how now they're going to shift focus and make sure that they expedite funds to the sectors that actually need it?
Well, you see, the thing about this budget, it was just incomplete.
Open-ended?
Yeah, so you do analysis, you put it on the table, and there's no resolution of what's going to be done. Instead, all that detail of what needs to take place is deferred to a different process.
Yeah, they're saying it's going to be announced in the next budget speech.
Which is new. It's a process that we don't understand. We have no certainty of what the outcome will be there. So I don't think this is not helping. The financial well-being of South Africans are materially impacted by fiscal policy, and where we are now, there's an erosion that's continuing here to everyone's dismay.
Let's talk about this while we're still on ratings agencies. I mean, Fitch, which already rates South Africa's local and foreign debt non-investment, warned that Treasury was actually straying from fiscal consolidation, while Standard & Poor's said politics were the main hurdle to arresting the fiscal slide. Do you think they have a point? And then how do we fix this situation? We've heard about political noise and imbalance and uncertainty affecting the performance of the economy directly.
You know, when you look at rating agencies, you actually find different texture in their analysis. And one would have come to a conclusion that Fitch is very politicized in the way it looked at things. And often it was too aggressive in how it looked at SA. But I'm afraid, in a self-made manner, we've made them look right.
Yeah.
And increasingly, it is true that the politics have blurred the economic outcomes.
Yes.
And I'm dismayed by that outcome, because South Africa still has institutions. So when we talk about a crisis, I also just need to contribute there a little bit. Things have deteriorated, but we're not in a crisis because things can be worse. It has been in Russia, it has been in Brazil, it has been in Mexico. Where we are now, it's an erosion. We are not yet at a point where we get, for example, the whole level of fiscal policy lost.
Yeah.
We still can do a few things on taxes, which will be the order of the day in February. We're not in a crisis economically yet, but I'm afraid that rating agencies' views, as aggressive as they've been on the politics, have been proved right, and it's all very self-made.
Let's find out from the gentleman. Gentlemen, let's find out from you guys. I mean, William, a lot of people have been saying, well, the global economy is not doing so great. That is why South Africa is doing poorly. Why are we singling out our economy as it is still an emerging economy? Why are we singling out our economy? Why is it not performing to the best of our expectations?
Well, given the analysis, I think it's pretty clear. You know, the politics is destroying these things. We're leading up to December. They don't have any answers because they don't know what's going to happen in December. the reason you've got SOEs being fed this continual amount of money is you have to say whose interest does it serve that many of our state-owned enterprises are deliberately kept in a state of chaos.
Yeah.
It's not by some kind of natural order. You know, it feeds a very vicious and racist stereotype to suggest that they're chaotic and they can't function because of the nature of the people that staff them. Not at all. It's deliberate strategy by people to ensure that the SAA is in that constant state of chaos. And the only solution has been, just keep on giving them money, because it serves a political end to ensure that those SOEs aren't able to function effectively. Because the moment they do, as the analyst has just pointed out correctly, that's when your institutions start to stand up and function properly. And the moment that happens, it means those who are doing shady things can't do so quite so easily.
True.
So you keep them in chaos in order to allow those who are trying to do shady things get away with what they're doing.
Shani?
To continue on Lesiba's point earlier, there are things that are within our control, and part of that is efficient tax collection. We have a 50 billion hole from the minister's own assessment. Yeah. And quite frankly, things could have been done differently. And incidentally, I don't know if you've seen the major weekend papers this morning. The SARS took out a huge ad, almost a full page, telling us disingenuously, by the way, that they've increased tax collection from 321 billion to over $1 trillion in the past 10 years. Come on, they don't factor in inflation, they don't factor in the increase in the tax base and a whole lot of other things. So it was really in reaction to, I think, to the minister's speech that, you know what, you're actually not doing a good job in collecting our taxes. And that was their reaction. But, he mentioned a lot of things that really are troubling. Remember, governments aren't really interested in paying off their debt. What they're interested or should be interested in being able to afford their debts. I mean, if you look at the first world countries like your UK, US, and Japan, they have much higher debt to GDP ratios, but they can afford the debt. And we are a developing economy, and when it goes above 60%, as the projection is by 2022, we are in serious trouble.
Let's talk about the nuclear deal, the nuclear programs that everybody was so hoping that the minister is going to put down a huge budget towards, and he seemingly just, scaled away from it. Do you think we can expect to have it come up later on in the later term budgets?
I took heart not only from the medium term budget policy that came out that there are no plans around nuclear, also from the ministers earlier, it was a week before, at the Washington World Bank IMF meeting where he said he has no intention to do that because it could prove expensive. But what's worrying me is that while that comes from the Minister of Finance, elsewhere, and this was the order of the discussion outside after the medium term, you could see the ministers when they talk, there's a talk that we can be doing this. So there's no consensus in what I see come out. The Minister of Finance is saying one thing which we take heart in, but elsewhere, I'm hearing a very different conversation. Notwithstanding now that because it's such an incomplete budget statement and the resolutions are coming elsewhere, I'm not too sure what to expect in February.
Ooh, Lesiba, thank you so much. You've just given me more things to think about. You left me more confused than ever. That is Lesiba Motata from Lesiba Investment Solutions deliberating the midterm budget speech that was delivered by the minister this week. After the break, more Media Monitor. Do stay with us.
The Law Society has slammed notices sent to 4 universities to jack up standards or risk losing their LLB courses. The Council on Higher Education issued a stern warning to the universities to conform within 6 months.
I think it will affect the university. I think outside the law faculty, there's a funding issue.
It's been 112 years since Enoch Sontonga died as a relatively unknown composer, choir master and teacher. But today his legacy lives on through his greatest composition, Nkosi Sikeleli Afrika.
For all your news updates, stay tuned to Your World from Monday to Sunday.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Well, crime has become fairly synonymous with South Africa. A staggering 19,000 people have been murdered in the country since last year, and this equates to around 52 people per day. Burglaries, drug-fueled crimes and car hijackings are also up. Now, these grim stats were presented by Police Minister Fikile Mbalula on Tuesday this week. It's a picture of a crime-ridden society where ordinary South Africans are the pawns in a criminal chessboard. Let's quickly take a look at this insert.
We must not see these statistics just as pure numbers. Behind the numbers are real feelings, real lives, real hurt, real harm, real losses, deaths, feelings of unsafety. These statistics represent the memory of that gruesome rape or murder. These numbers have consistently said no community can claim they live in safety and feel safe in South Africa.
Gentlemen, shocking statistics that the minister says that crime in general in South Africa has decreased, but the contact crime, which is the most important, has increased. William, what was your reading into the crime stats? What were your highlights?
Well, I don't think there are any highlights. I think there are only lowlights there. I think the fact that, yet again, the figures that we're being provided aren't being disaggregated. So we don't know, for example, about how many women and children are being attacked as a result of these things. It's as though you've got a picture of stats that's kind of divorced from the reality. It's kind of linked to it somehow, but there's no real link there. You know, and if you look at the broader political situation, you have a scenario where 3-5 years later, I've forgotten now how many years it is, no one has yet been held accountable for Marikana. Action by the police. We still don't have it would be nice if we'd have a commissioner of police who'd last longer than 2 years.
Who's under suspicion him right now?
Isn't a complete crook. And then you've got your NPA where they refuse to act on many of these cases. So, I mean, the one highlight was the Coffin case where you see that where there's a will, there's a direct interest, and there's a decent prosecutor, you can get things to happen.
Absolutely.
But when your overall tendency is to undermine these things and to not talk about them in any real or meaningful way, and when your Minister of Police talks and is completely dismissive of our constitutional rights and encourages police to go and grab testicles and other bits and pieces of human anatomy. You know, you're saying there's a fundamental bloody problem here, and that the stats, they don't even begin to tell half the picture.
What do you think, Shani? I mean, for the fact that Gauteng is actually the leading province when it comes to crime. I found those ratios a bit interesting because Cape Town was actually last on that list.
Well, they give the stats in two ways. First, the absolute numbers. So in terms of absolute murders, Gauteng by far, we take the cake. But when it comes to rates of murder, which is number of people murdered per 100,000, it was actually quite surprising that Eastern Cape came out on top.
Yeah,
I mean, you would have,
shocked.
you know, but you know, coming back to the bigger picture, I actually think that the quality or the state of our institutions is the real concern. To William's point earlier, it's not so much that, you know, those institutions, we've got the Hawks, we've got IPID, we've got, you know, the police overall, but they, instead of actually fighting crime, they're fighting each other. You know, how many times do we hear that this boss is suing that boss doesn't want to let go of his job, which he shouldn't have had in the first place, and so on and so on. So people are playing, you know, chess games with people's lives, and it kind of says something about either the crop of the leadership that we have today, which obviously is resulting in all this. Yes, we have other socioeconomic issues that do contribute to the high levels of crime, but I think without good leadership, which is, I think, what we're seeing right now. I mean, leadership is not sending 300 tweeters every month. You know, it's about actually taking concrete action that will result in our state of affairs when it comes to crime changing significantly. 4,000 murders in 1 year should not be allowed. It happened in Gauteng only, but you know, if it was 4,000 murders around the country, it would be way too much.
I mean, William, for the Minister of Police to even consider calling the army into some areas because the police there can't handle the situation on the ground, does this mean that our police are not properly fit to actually deal with those situations in crime-ridden areas?
Well, it just shows a distinct absence of a grasp of how to actually deal with and fundamentally reduce crime. You know, we've got a host of ridiculously clever people in this country who know how to solve these things. They've got evidence going into communities, helping work them. We've got some outstandingly good police officers around the country, and yet, you know, on a national level, it's like you get this sort of backlash response that says, oh, well, if it's really bad there, what we better do is call in the army. No, that's not how you're going to fundamentally reduce the cause of criminal problems. You know, this idea that bringing in more guns is going to solve things. I mean, it's almost worthy of Donald Trump in its ineptitude. It really is that problematic. So I think that what we need to be seeing is, again, you know, you need to start to put in professional police officers who we've got in numbers, who are there, they understand the job, what they need to do, put them in the positions where they can start to exercise those powers. They've got to start to build up that trust in their communities and make sure that resources are going to the right kinds of places. That's the way that you start to talk about longer term solutions, and we had that, and that's why South Africa for the last 15 years, broadly speaking, has had a decreasing levels of crime, you know, despite all the challenges that we have. So we've started to win that, but it seems that recently we've kind of gone, well, and part of that is about the fact that we change our leadership every 5 minutes, or because they're corrupt, or because of blah, 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 you know. So it's very hard for them, the people down there, to know what's our policy. When no one's there, there's no level of stability there, you know, and that's what Mr. Mutaba was saying earlier around the finances. It's exactly the same thing. This is just a different sector.
Absolutely. I mean, speak to us about the fact that the minister also blamed the community policing forums. He says they've lost their mandate, they can't provide further assistance to the police, and therefore there needs to be new mechanisms that need to be introduced to fight crime. Why is he leaving it to the communities to deal with crime that police should be handling?
No, absolutely. I mean, for me, the communities have lost faith in a lot of the police. I mean, let's be honest. There are a lot of policemen out and women out there who are doing a great job. They put their lives at risk.
Case, for example.
But if you have a clear-cut case like the Senzo Meyiwa, you know, which there were people in the vicinity who witnessed, and we can't bring somebody to book. How is the community supposed to have faith in that kind of process? So, you know, we've had sporadic incidences where people were actually now taking the law into their own hands, and if the police continue to fail, unfortunately we're going to see more and more of this instances where community decide, you know what, we will be our own police. You know, we will, you know, meter out the justice as we see fit. And you don't want to encourage that situation, but unfortunately people are going to be left with no option but to explore other means. You can't just sit back and allow people to be slaughtered.
Yeah,
you know?
But I mean, William, doesn't this then render us a society that takes the law into our own hands because we don't believe in our justice system, particularly the police, which are the first order that should be meting our justice?
Yeah, completely. You know, these things really fundamentally undermine our democracy. And I think it's part of that bigger political plan of ensuring that different sectors are in a state of crisis, because when things are in a state of crisis and services can't function effectively, it allows those who are seeking to keep it in that state of crisis to do their business, because we're so busy focusing on trying to get a leader there and get them to be held accountable that we're not seeing what's going on here. And I think that media have a role to play in this. You know, they need to be making sure that we understand all of the connections between each of these things. We need to say, well, what is the impact of bringing police or the army into a community, and is that really going to solve the issue that's causing that crime, or is it just going to escalate further threats of violence? You know, we don't talk about, we've got enough violence in our country. What we should be talking about at every point is how to de-escalate those levels of violence. Instead, we have our ministers escalating the discourse of violence at every single turn that they get. That doesn't help. It's not going to help in a domestic situation when your leaders are saying, go and grab them by the balls. You know, it doesn't help the lovers who are having an argument about things. It doesn't help parents who are going to discipline their children. So linked to that, you bring in, and yet we've got a progressive ruling with banning corporal punishment in the home. These are incredibly good progressive things, and yet that discourse is not being reflected in the upper echelons of power. Not at all.
A very quick one, Shani. Let's look at measures that the police could undertake in making sure that they restore order and credibility for themselves.
I think they can start with the staffing instead of taking people who are politically connected or who are friends with this person, or they know so much about the other person so they can't be prosecuted. If we get the right people in the right jobs, for starters, then we'll be on our way to actually solving some of our problems. Like William was saying earlier, we have a lot of really talented individuals in this country, very intelligent people who can come up with real solutions that does not require eroding our constitutional democracy in order to like bring in the army at every, at a moment's notice. Let's get those people who have the expertise to actually do the job.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Media Monitor returns shortly after this break. Don't go anywhere. Right, let's go to Kenya now, where the Electoral Commission is expected to make an announcement today on the status of non-voting constituencies after violence caused the cancellation of voting in 4 counties in the rerun of the presidential elections on Thursday. The Commission chairperson, Wafula Chibukati, says 25 constituencies were affected by violent disruptions, forcing the Commission to suspend the elections indefinitely. Let's go to Kenya live now, where our foreign editor, Sophie Mokwena, is there to give us live updates of the situation on the ground. Sophie, a very good morning to you. Do give us the latest on the ground. How are things in Kenya on Sunday?
Well, thank you, Alicia. Indeed, Kenya is very quiet this morning. Many people have gone to church and perhaps seeking their divine intervention as the country stands at a crossroads, because there are problems in terms of half of the country, people who didn't go to the polls saying that they don't support what has happened the last past 2 days, that is elections and counting of the results. On the other hand, we have half of the country that went to the polls and they have decided to make their choice, as it is their democratic right to do so. But what I can tell you is that currently the voter turnout stands at 43%, and the constituencies that has been declared and verified currently, it's 229 out of 291. We have voter registration that stands at 19 million, but currently when you look at the results that have been verified and currently in the kitty for Uhuru Kenyatta, it's 6.7 million. You are aware that the last election he got 8 something million, almost 9 million, but this time around as we speak it's 6.7 million, but you still have some constituencies that must be verified and be declared.
Sophie, I mean, let's talk about Odinga's camp. What are they saying? Because they have outspokenly convinced, he has rather outspokenly convinced his supporters to boycott these elections. How credible are these polls if the main opposition wasn't part of it?
If you are part of the opposition or a sympathizer to the opposition or with the opposition, you would certainly be aggrieved. But if you are a supporter of Jubilee, the ruling party, and Uhuru Kenyatta in particular, the current president, you'll be celebrating. Therefore, it's a mixed reaction. It's half saying They don't recognize these elections, those who didn't go to the polls and those who made their mark during the election a few days ago. They have decided that they will abide by whatever announcement made by the Electoral Commission either later tonight or tomorrow.
All right. Now, Sophie, talk to us about the violence. And we understand that about 8 or is it 5 people, just confirm the figures, were actually killed in election-related violence. What can you tell us about that? And have things calmed down at this stage?
Well, indeed, reports are that 5 people were killed since election. But the reality is we still have to verify, and the police, we haven't had a privilege to speak to the security officers. We've tried since we arrived here to speak to the Minister of Security to try and find out in terms of security arrangements and perhaps those sporadic violence, the impact thereof, and perhaps to confirm the number of people who were affected. But unfortunately, as we speak, we are still waiting. Earlier on this morning, when we were on our way to Mr. Raila Odinga's house, the NASA party leader, where we had an exclusive interview with him earlier this morning. The interview will be aired later today. We tried again to speak to the security cluster, but they are still not available. We are also trying currently to get the president, but it's very difficult. This is not South Africa.
All right. And what is the observer mission saying there, Mam Sophie? What are they saying? Have they tallied are they happy with the way that things have been conducted? We know that some of the constituencies that didn't vote was because of the fact that the election authorities were actually fearing security concerns in the area.
Well, in terms of the international observers, we had a privilege on voting day to interact with the AU in particular. The AU is still here, and they took a decision that they will continue because they feel they have to continue to assist Kenya. You know, Kenya is Africa, Africa is Kenya, and therefore there was no way the African Union could pull out. Yes, indeed, they indicated that due to the resources and money, they couldn't do what they would love to do, but indeed they are still here, headed by former President Thabo Mbeki, who indicated on Friday that he is not going to comment until elections are announced because there are issues that needs to be dealt with. For example, the opposition taking a decision to boycott elections, but also places where elections couldn't take place, and therefore they couldn't give us a clear verdict in terms of this election. But we are hoping that after the elections results have been announced, we will know exactly what is the position of the AU. But you are aware that most of the observers didn't come this time around. For example, Qatar Foundation and others having scaled down in terms of deployment. Therefore, we are waiting to hear the regional body and perhaps the local observers, the churches, the NGOs, and perhaps the African Union later in the week. I doubt today they will give us any information or reaction to what has transpired here in Kenya, because I think it's a wait and see, and everybody is concerned because you are aware that there are currently court cases that are pending, and we don't know which way the verdict will go, and therefore people are very careful before they can comment. But like I indicated, we spoke to the leader of NASA, Raila Odinga, and that interview will be aired later today. But at 10 o'clock South African time, Aldrin St-Pierre will give you an update in terms of what Raila Odinga said, and also throw forward in terms of who will be speaking to later on, because we'll be speaking to NASA Secretary General and perhaps some government officials. And I think at that time we'll have a sense of the two groups, what are they saying.
Sophie, thank you so much for that update. We'll definitely touch base with her later on at 10 o'clock. That is our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, who's out in Kenya during the elections. Gentlemen, you know, Professor Stephen Friedman was saying that election observer missions are just in the free and fair business. How do you think they're going to declare this election free and fair, William? As we know, it hasn't been free and fair.
Yeah, it hasn't, and neither were the first, you know, which is why we're in this particular mess to begin with. So you know, and the credibility of these observer missions themselves was brought under deep scrutiny precisely because they said then, oh no, the first ones were free and fair, and then the court said, oh no, actually they aren't. So I think that maybe one of the potential outcomes might be that they aren't free and fair, and then as I understand it in Kenya, that would mean that Parliament and I believe the Speaker might start to come in and take a larger hand in terms of how power is going to be shared. But I mean, it's really not an area of my expertise.
Let's talk about this, gentlemen. We just heard Sophie saying that the AU is now looking deeper into this. But where was the AU when this whole impasse actually started? Why couldn't they give a clear resolution? I mean, the courts gave a directive, but where was the AU in trying to sit down the two opposition leaders and saying, listen, you're going to elections, this is what you need to do?
Unfortunately, I think our AU tends to show up at places for PR purposes rather than actually getting things done properly.
Free and fair business.
You know, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's saddening because, you know what, during Thabo Mbeki's term, he was the man behind the African Renaissance agenda. And the collapse of Zimbabwe happened under, you know, his watch, and now it looks like he's overseeing the collapse of Kenya. And he's each time giving his stamp of approval. You're good, you're good. So it completely, you know, does serious damage to his agenda of, you know, taking up Africa where it needs to be. So he says the right things. But in the event, when it comes to taking action, he doesn't really seem to follow through.
What do you think Kenya needs to do, William, in terms of trying to forge that unity and progress the country? Because we know that this decision has, I'm sure, halted a lot of decisions that have pertain to government improvements.
Look, I don't know. You know, I think that they are really in a deep bind. I think that many of their institutions are so deeply compromised that to come out with something that isn't going to result in a lot more violence and distrust by the people is going to be incredibly hard. It is going to require something of a small miracle, I imagine, to get the different sides to sit down together and to find some kind of a solution that the citizens of Kenya are going to find acceptable and palatable, because as we're seeing, there's levels of violence, there's huge levels of distrust around these things. If they go and declare these elections free and fair and, you know, a winner for Mr. Kenyatta, then I think we're likely to see spiraling violence, which would be tragic.
Let's talk about the electoral body and the involvement in all of this and how they've handled the reruns. I mean, I remember they indicated very clearly that the space and amount of time that they were given to do the rerun was just, they were not going to be able to do a proper election. But of course, the date was still given, and even after the main opposition pulled out, shouldn't have these elections been postponed, Shawnee?
Absolutely. It's like they've just given grounds for these elections to be again nullified, because if the electoral body was saying that we need more time, in fact I read a story where one of the officers actually ran to the United States looking for asylum because they were being threatened. So clearly there are grounds already for these elections to be nullified, and I don't think they gave it proper. It was like, you know, we want to be president, do what you need to do, and, you know, approve me to be president, which is very, very sad. So I wouldn't be surprised if this elections are also nullified. A total waste of resources, because elections are an expensive business.
Absolutely.
And Kenya can least afford to actually throw money at this kind of nonsense. And yeah, it's very sad. I actually think some of the money actually had to be borrowed or was donated or something like that, you know, and to see this outcome is very saddening.
William, what stories should we look forward to this coming week before we end the show?
Well, I'm hoping we can focus on something a bit more positive. I think around the SABC, the fact that we've got a stable board, I think that they're having their first meeting, if not today, Sunday, tomorrow, I believe, which would be very useful, and hopefully we can start to see, and they're the most independent board since our democracy, because they're now responsible for employment of all of the senior executives and disciplining them and making sure that they answer to them. And I think that there's a lot of hope and potential optimism there, and I'm hoping that some of those stories are going to emerge. And of course, what we'd like to see is follow through on unpacking the meaning of the crime stats and unpacking the meaning of the midterm budget and who really stands to lose. But I'm not sure we will see that. But South Africa is never boring, you know. We know that by this time next week we'll be going, wow, who could have thought that? What's going to happen?
William Bird, Shawnee Makari, thank you so much, gentlemen. But Shawnee, a very quick one for you. What do you think we should be looking forward to in the news this week? Or what story do you think media missed this week?
You can look forward to a politician saying something stupid.
That sums it all up. And that's how we end today's Media Monitor. And of course, we hope that you enjoyed the show. We are back live and direct to you, same time and place next week. That is right here on the SABC News channel. I'm back on top of the hour with more news. Stay right there. Don't go anywhere.